Hello. Hi, this is Phil Goldberg, and I welcome you all to this Hay House Live. I'm sorry we're starting a few minutes late, but we had technical difficulties. This is the first time I have ever done a Facebook Live, and something got bollocksed, as they say. So we're starting late, but I'm delighted to be here. This is Phil Goldberg. I am the author of this book you see behind me, or I'll hold it up here, The Life of Yogananda, the story of the yogi who became the first modern guru. It's my first Hay House book, so this is my first broadcast to Hay House aficionados, and I'm delighted to be part of the Hay House world and to welcome you to the first of 4 Facebook Lives we'll be doing about Yogananda and my book about Yogananda. We'll be covering different areas in each of the 4 lessons, so I hope you can tune in to all 4, and I hope you will introduce yourself and ask questions, and I'll try my best to navigate this new technology, what is new technology for me, and answer some of those questions. I am used to seeing people I speak to and looking at faces. So I'll have to settle for your introductions in text form. I will promise you that you will learn a great deal about Paramahansa Yogananda in these 4 sessions, even if you know a great deal about him already, even if you're a close student of his. And because there was a great deal that I uncovered in the course of doing my research for this book that was not previously known, or I shouldn't say that, but was not previously known to many people. And in addition to what you'll learn about Yogananda in the book and on these broadcasts, I hope you will also learn lessons from his life that will help you in your own. We study the lives of exceptional human beings because they inspire us and because they can also be instructive. Most people don't think that people of the spiritual stature of a Yogananda would endure difficulties and challenges in life the way we do. And they may not experience them quite the same way internally or react to them quite the same way in their lives, but they do experience ups and downs and difficulties and challenges, and Yogananda did, and he talked about it and he wrote about it, and I think we can all learn a great deal from that. Speaking of which, the publication date of the book is actually April 24th. Today's April 3rd. But you can pre-order the book online for immediate shipping when publication date comes. And as an incentive for you to pre-order the book, I created a 20-minute audio called Life Lessons from the Life of Yogananda, where I discuss exactly what I was referring to a minute ago. Some of the takeaways we can receive and absorb and take into our lives from learning about the life of a spiritual giant like Yogananda. So the first thing I want to address is the question that I was asked frequently during the few years I spent researching and writing this book. And that is, why bother? Why write a book about Yogananda? And why dig into a life that was already written about in his own autobiography? After all, I would bet that most of you listening now have read Autobiography of a Yogi and have studied perhaps his book and read more and more about it about him in other contexts. And so the question is, why, when somebody is as famous as he is for writing his own autobiography, an iconic book that has been read by millions of people, has made him no doubt the best known of all the gurus who have come to the West from India. What is there to add? So let me get that out of the way first. One reason is Yogananda's extraordinary contribution historically. Now, my previous book, which some of you may know, was called American Veda, and it covered the more than 200-year history. Excuse me, I'm trying to angle so there's no glare on my glasses, and it's not easy to do. Anyway, so I covered the 200 years of a fascinating history of the ancient teachings of India, what we think of as Vedanta philosophy, yoga philosophy, Vedic philosophy, all these wonderful ideas and principles and precepts, and most important, the techniques and methodologies of the yogic repertoire. They all came to the West from India over the course of a few hundred years, and especially from the 1960s on. And I believe, and the evidence supports this, that this process of India sending its emissaries and the ancient teachings being absorbed in the West and transmitted from the creative centers of the modern world, the US and Europe, is one of the most significant events of modern history. And I won't go into all the details about why that is so, but suffices to say that this transmission has utterly transformed how we in the West understand who we are as human beings, what our place is in the cosmos, in the universe, how we connect to one another and to the spiritual essence of life, how we go about improving our lives, how we go about improving our own inner world, our own condition, how we heal physically, mentally, spiritually. All these things have been powerfully affected. How we understand religion, how we engage our spirituality. This has all been affected by the transmission of ancient teachings from India, and nobody played a bigger role in that than Yogananda did. There have been many, many important gurus, and maybe only one or two comes close to the impact Yogananda had. And that legacy, which continues to this day, extraordinarily, because he passed away in 1952. That's 66 years ago. But the writing that he did in his lifetime endures in a whole library of books that he either wrote in his lifetime or were assembled from his writings and speeches by his the disciples who succeeded him, and the network of centers that he established in the Self-Realization Fellowship, which he created, and the some other organizations, smaller ones that teach in his name. The total effect of that, the total numbers of people who have been influenced by that, including probably all of us, is extraordinary. But the main factor was his own autobiography. And the historical contribution of Yogananda and his memoir, his autobiography, could not really be told in that book because it hadn't happened yet. It's happened over the course of time since the autobiography was published in 1946. Even during his lifetime, he had reached an extraordinary amount of people in the 32 years that he spent in the West, touring and traveling and lecturing to large numbers of people, teaching, establishing methods of teaching that were new and exceptional in those days. And we'll go into all that in other sessions. But it was when his book came out and took off and spread, or the English language version got to other parts of the world, that's when the numbers of people influenced by him really accelerated. And that continued after his death in 1952. So at this point, there are more than 100 facilities, centers, temples, and so forth in 178 countries. And in his name, teaching, his methods, his ideas, his philosophy, which he would say, of course, were not his own, but belonged to the legacy of his lineage of gurus and the Vedic tradition that they're from. And the autobiography itself has sold millions of copies in dozens of languages. So to put that in perspective is something he could not have done himself, and certainly could not have done in his own autobiography. And so it fell upon somebody like me, who's obsessed with this with this history, to put it in perspective. Now, the other factor, the other reason I thought I could bring something new and exciting to the life of a famous person like him is that a tremendous amount of information about his life, who he was, his upbringing, his family, his experiences as a young man and as a boy in India, and especially the details of his life after he left India and came to America. A lot of that is not in his own autobiography. If you remember his book, you'll remember that a great deal of it is really not about him. It's about these amazing yogis that he either knew or learned about. It was about the wisdom of ancient India and the philosophy. In fact, the book didn't even start out as an autobiography. He was gathering material to write a book about what he called the yogi Christs of India. He wanted to write about these amazing spiritual giants, and whether they were known and unknown, who performed miracles and did amazing things. And the book eventually morphed into some combination of writing about those yogis and yogic philosophy and his own personal life. And to his great credit, one of the appealing things about his autobiography, and I should add, the talks he gave, the letters he wrote, all of which I researched in depth, was that he was remarkably candid about his own human story, about his family, about his upbringing, about life, and the things he experienced, the emotions he felt. And a lot of spiritual giants, they don't speak very much about their personal lives, especially those who become monks. And Yogananda was a monk for almost all of his adult life. And often they don't speak about such personal things, but he did. And it's to his credit and to our great benefit that he did. But he also left a lot out of his book. And when I had the idea to do the book, and I asked myself the same question I've been asked, which is, what is there to add that's not in either his autobiography or some of the memoirs that people who knew him wrote? And so I reread the autobiography and I realized, God, there's a lot that's not in here. And I did a page count. And it turns out that less than 10% of the autobiography of a yogi is about his life after he came to the West. And when you think about it, it is those years, those 32 years, that made him as famous as he was and as beloved as he was, and where he made his impact in the world. He spent almost all of his adult life. He came here when he was 27 and he passed when he was 59. And so less than 10% of the book is about those years. And I set out to fill those gaps. And I think what I discovered is very exciting. And you will all benefit, not just because you're interested in an interesting life, which is enough, frankly, but also because you will learn, as you did if you read Autobiography of a Yogi, you may have the same experience reading my biography of Yogananda, of learning lessons that you can take away and apply to your own life. And we'll get into that more as we go along. So that's why I wrote the book. And I must tell you that I was not only inspired, but invigorated every step of the way. Researching someone's a life as extraordinary as that can be very painstaking. You know, you wade through a zillion documents and letters, and you speak to people, and you peruse everything that's online and everything written about him. And it can get tedious, but there were always new discoveries and always exciting things to learn. I mean, little things like finding out that the British government was essentially spying on him during his years in America. I mean, this was a fascinating discovery. Little things like that. And, you know, they were like opening his mail and checking on him and writing about who is this guy and is he a threat? And, you know, it was during the years of the British occupation of India, and Gandhi was making great progress And Yogananda was a fan of Gandhi's and would meet Gandhi in the 1930s. So they were keeping an eye on him. But we'll come back to that. I want to explain my own relationship to Yogananda because people ask me that. Am I a disciple? Is this a tribute? Is this, my book, a kind of what's called a hagiography or hagiography? I've never been sure which. Essentially, the life of a saint, just something to pay tribute to a spiritual teacher. And the answer is no, it is not that. It's an objective, fair inquiry into a human life. I approached it like other people approach biographies of famous people, whether they're great artists or inventors or statesmen or politicians. Just finding out everything I could, evaluating the information as objectively as I could, and telling a compelling story from birth to death, with all the drama that is involved in a public life like his, one where he's not only beloved, but hated and despised by some people, and people who are out to get him. So there was drama, and I told that story. I am not, and never have been, a disciple of Yogananda's. I have never become a formal student of Yogananda. Many, many people have been inspired and to launch a spiritual path when they read Autobiography of a Yogi. And other people are inspired because they're already on a spiritual path, and then Yogananda's teachings and writings helped inform their path and maybe accelerate their path and in many ways influence their path. But he and his teachings were not their path. That's the category I'm in. I first read Autobiography of a Yogi, at the risk of giving away my age, in 1969 or 70. I was part of that generation of 60s people who got really turned on by the practice of meditation and yoga and the teachings of India, and was reading everything I could. And in those days, among the sort of counterculture seekers of spiritual growth and development and wisdom, we would pass books around to each other, and we'd say, hey, have you read this? Have you read that? And the Autobiography of a Yogi was probably the most borrowed, gifted, and ripped off of all the books that were going around in those days. And I was one of those people. Some people read it and then immediately became devotees and students of Yogananda through his Self-Realization Fellowship or one of the smaller groups. And his way, his methods became their practice, their spiritual practice, their sadhana. And he became, for many of them, their guru, even after his passing. This wasn't the case with me. I had already been on a path. I had already been practicing meditation. In fact, I was about to be trained as a teacher of transcendental meditation by Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. But like so many others, I just fell in love with Yogananda and his book, and found him a source of inspiration and knowledge from then on, one of many. And I admired, I respected him, I looked up to him, and established very friendly relations with many of his disciples. And then In fact, I still have the copy. Oh, I should bring it out. Next time I will bring it out. Oh, here, wait, it's here. This is my copy of the autobiography of a yogi, which I read in 1970. The price tag, the hardcover, is $5. Imagine that. Now, I didn't have $5 to my name in those days. That wasn't spent on food or car fare. And so I'm pretty sure I borrowed the book and never gave it back. So I like to say that I've carried the book with me all these years through many moves, and I still have it. And I owe a great debt of gratitude to whoever loaned it to me. And I am working off that karma of not returning it by writing this book about him and speaking about him in a respectful and admiring way. But I will repeat, I was not a disciple and am not. So I come at it as an author, a writer, a historian, and a student of India and its wisdom and the effect it had on our lives. And as a lover of great stories, as a storyteller, I found his human story to be compelling, fascinating, and very much worth writing about. And I hope you do too. One of the things I wanted to bring to the book, in addition to the events and details that were not published elsewhere, was this sense of a human being growing from childhood through adolescence into young adulthood, and then his mature years. You could see somebody evolve. He learned, he grew, he became a more mature human being and a more compelling teacher. And that growth that we all grow through is something I wanted to write about because we can all learn from it. And especially in the lives of spiritual teachers, as opposed to other famous people whose contributions were great in the world. There's a tendency to idealize them, to put them on pedestals, to make certain assumptions about their lives. In some cases, to assume they were saints or even incarnations of God. And many people see Yogananda that way. I don't even entertain that question because I take it as an axiom that ordinary people like me are not capable of knowing the spiritual status of people like Yogananda. What mattered to me was he was, no matter what else he was, a great teacher, a great guru, saint, whatever, he was still a human being. And we forget sometimes that these great spiritual teachers are human beings. But they are human beings. They're different as in middle age as they were earlier in their lives because they learn and they grow and they have ups and downs. They have joys, they have sorrows, they have disappointments. They have triumphs. They get sick. They have pain. They get upset. They get angry, believe it or not. Yes, they do. They get angry. And they even have conflicts with other human beings at times because this is the human condition. And no matter what is their internal state, which may be something of a measure of peace and expanded awareness that we only can aspire to, the human part of them endures, the ups and downs of life, celebrates the great joys and pleasures of life, experiences the love of others, and in some cases, the hatred of others. Not that they hate, but they are hated and attacked. Yogananda had controversies and conflicts in his life and a tremendous number of challenges. And that I found most interesting and what is not often talked about, because we want to hold these people in reverence and only speak about their greatness. But part of that greatness is how they deal with these conflicts and controversies and ups and downs and challenges. Yogananda came here in 1920. He taught, built an organization, and wrote books, and it reached millions of people's lives through the Roaring Twenties, the Great Depression, World War II, and the aftermath of World War II. Prior to coming here, and this was also fascinating, was a childhood in India during very interesting times, and especially after his family moves to Calcutta, and I'll talk more about those details of his life next time. India was under the thumb of the British Empire, and being a colonial, being the victim of colonialism is not an easy thing for a great nation like India. And there was great turmoil and suffering and all kinds of historic events that Yogananda's childhood and teen years were informed by. It was the early days of the freedom struggle. And, you know, when he was a young man, World War I broke out. There were famines, there were upheavals, and all of that. And then the culture shock of coming to America, all of those kinds of things, and his family, like all of us, he had a family, he had schooling, he had traditions, all of which shaped the life that became Yogananda. He was born in 1893. Mukunda Lal Ghosh, family name was Ghosh. And the events of Mukunda's life that shaped the person who came to be known as Paramahansa Yogananda is part of the story, and a compelling and illuminating part of the story. Then, when he comes to America as a young man of only 27, with a mission given to him by his own teachers and his own lineage to bring the wisdom of India, and especially his own lineage of Kriya Yoga, to America, at a time when there were very few others who, from India who had come here. This is not like the 1960s when there were so many gurus coming. He was preceded by the great Swami Vivekananda, who was kind of a role model for Yogananda. In fact, as we'll see, when his family moved to Calcutta, the family home, which still exists and still in the family, and I take tours to India from time to time, and we'll be leading a tour with colleagues in this September. And part of the tour will be the places that Yogananda lived, the ashram where he studied with his guru, the streets of Calcutta, and all those kinds of things. Well, I may as well say it. If you're if you're interested in that, please go to my website, philipgoldberg.com, where you'll also find information about the book. But the point is, all of that that preceded him, Vivekananda, Sri Ramakrishna, Rabindranath Tagore, they were all part of the milieu he grew up in. You can walk from Yogananda's home, which is maintained as a kind of shrine to him, although his family is great grandnephew or whatever still lives there. But you could walk from there to where Vivekananda grew up. So there was precedent when he came, but not many. And there were other gurus who had come to the West, but they didn't stay long. Yogananda was the first of the major gurus to come to the West and make it his home. Los Angeles, where I am, became not only his home, but the headquarters of his international organization, and it remains that to this day. We'll be coming on, the centennial of his coming here in a couple of years, and that's a long time. So the impact is pretty tremendous when you think about it. So for all those reasons, I wanted to tell the human story. I also wanted to address certain controversies that still rage to this day, all these years later. People, a small number of people, but passionate people, are to this day still argue about certain events that happened in Yogananda's life in the 1920s and 1930s. What's true, what's not true, what do we know, what we don't know. People make certain assumptions. And I wanted to address those controversies head on and discover what I could. I'll address those later. But for now, I just want to remind you that this is only the first of 4, and encourage you again to pre-order the book. You can go to my website, philipgoldberg.com, or just go straight to Amazon or Barnes & Noble. Next time, we'll start talking about more of the details of his life. We'll start with his childhood. We'll move on. And I can't tell you everything that's in the book in these sessions, obviously, and it would be kind of self-defeating if I tried. But we can talk about some of the highlights and the essence and dig into some of the takeaways from his life. And I will tell you that, after I finished researching and writing and constructing a narrative of his life, it was only upon reflection that I realized I learned a lot. Not just learned a lot about my subject matter, but I learned a lot about life and how to live it. And in that respect, Yogananda was not just a great spiritual teacher, he was also a role model. And not all the gurus, you can't say that about all the gurus, as wise as they were, as influential as they were, as great as as transformative as their methods are. They don't all speak about their personal lives, and their personal lives are not written about objectively like I tried to do. So the human story is not only fascinating and extraordinary, but one we can all learn from. So I hope that excites you, and I hope you come back to these remaining Facebook Lives. I'll be making personal appearances as when the book comes out. Actually, starting next week, before the book comes out, I'll be in Encinitas and then Los Angeles, and then in other parts of the country. And I hope you will come to where I am. You can find my calendar, my schedule on my website. I'll be in New York and Chicago, Boston, and other places. So I hope you come and we can meet in person. And there it is. I will take a look at the questions that were sent in, if any were, and promise to get to them next time. So thank you. Namaste. See you next time.